one. I got with me today Zach Wolf. He's a former Marine. He's coming to talk about how his time in the military shaped his view of masculinity and what it means to be a man when he came back and started the family. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. Beautiful day out here. So let's get started with what motivated you to join the military, the Marines?
I ended up joining the Marine Corps at about 23 years old, and I had recently kind of been laid off from a job working construction, and I needed to change the scenery, and I had some friends that were getting out, and they mentioned to me they thought it'd be an interesting thing that I might be into, so I went down to the local recruiting office and joined the Marine Corps, and the rest is history. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. How did you just do one tour in Afghanistan, or?
Yeah, so I was in from 2009 to 2014, so I had a 5-year contract. My military occupational specialty was 0331, which is a machine gunner. My first deployment was to Afghanistan from 2010 to 2011, and then I went on a Marine Expeditionary Unit in 2012. And then my last year I worked as a machine gun instructor. I taught machine guns and machine gun tactics for 1st Marine Division.
All right. And how was that time, man?
It was good. It was really great. It had its moments. It definitely had some phases, I think. I was very impressionable, I feel like, when I first joined and when I first got to boot camp, as a 23-year-old male, I'm a little bit different than maybe some of the counterparts that usually join at 18. So I have about a 5-year, maturation difference. But it was a rude awakening, I think. I think up until that point, I didn't really understand the terminology of camaraderie, and I was kind of in life for me, and boot camp was a very interesting time. It's Marine Corps boot camp is the longest. It's 13 weeks, and they definitely mold and shape you in a way that is very unique. And I think that really helped me become the man I am today, and really had some interesting qualities built into it in terms of my just foundational principles, and kind of my character.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned it brought camaraderie into your life, stopped more or less living to yourself, but that would happen starting a family anyways.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what are some other ways that it changed the way you live your life?
Yeah, most definitely. I definitely think that it changed the way that I thought about what resiliency was, and then also the ability to, the Marine Corps, we use some different terminology, and one of the things we really like is the term adapt and overcome. And it really taught me how to adapt and overcome in just about any sort of scenario that I ever faced. And I think that is a very unique thing that I continue to see play out as I, progress and grow as a man, and then also with my children, as a father and also as a husband too. But it really it shaped some character principles in terms of my ability to be more of a team player, I guess, than a solo, there was a situation when I was in boot camp where there was a young man who was in boot camp with me who couldn't make it over this obstacle course wall, and I remember going back to help him. And I remember the drill instructors, that was like a no-no for them. They were like, you have to let him get over the wall. But other recruits is the term, is what you are when you're in boot camp. But they came back to help me as well. And it was a very unique situation where they really didn't know what to do, because even though it wasn't really something that they emphasized recruits do for other recruits, it was a unique experience where it gave myself and the other recruits that were with me the ability to say, hey, I got you, let's get over the wall. I got you, and I really fell in love with the Marine Corps and boot camp. I really embraced it. I know, depending on who you speak to, some people would say that it's a pretty rough experience. I was pretty physically fit when I went into boot camp, so it wasn't too physically demanding for me. It was difficult, but it was only as difficult as I allowed it to be mentally, I think. And I just always took it one day at a time and one step at a time.
Yeah.
So.
And so I imagine this whole experience pretty radically shifted who you are, how you view the world, how you work in a team. And then we'll come back to maybe the time you spent overseas, but when you came back and started the family,
Yeah.
was that a shift? Was it a difficult transition, or how'd that go?
Oh, most definitely. So, I am on my second marriage right now. I've been married for 2 years, actually 3 years. And I am married to an incredible woman. My wife is amazing and very unique, and I couldn't ask for a better partner. My previous marriage had its difficulties, and I would consider myself somebody who was not ready to be a husband when I entered that marriage, and I have a child as well from that relationship, and my daughter's amazing. I wouldn't change a thing, to be honest. I feel really fortunate that I was able to start a family at a time when I wasn't really ready to have a family, but still continue, outside of the Marine Corps when I got out. And I feel really blessed that I was so fortunate, and the journey of life kind of played out the way that it did, because if I wouldn't have taken a left when I could have took a right, I wouldn't be in the situation that I'm in, I don't think, in terms of where I'm at with my life currently. So, yeah.
I like it. So to get right down to it, you know that the Gillette ad about masculinity?
Yeah.
The men kind of holding each other accountable?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, would you say your time in the Marines was a net positive or net negative effect on your view of masculinity in that sense?
I would think that the ability to hold men accountable was probably about 80 to 90% net positive, and then about 10% net negative. And the only reason I say net negative is I got out of the Marine Corps in 2014, and I battled alcoholism during my time in the Marine Corps, and shortly after that too. And I've been sober now for almost 4 years. I quit drinking November 11th, 2015. So, I think that sometimes in the Marine Corps, because of somewhat of what the culture was, you've seen some interesting transitions in the Marine Corps recently where I think they're addressing some of the problems with alcohol abuse more frequently than they used to when I was in. I know that's only a 5-year difference, but, I think that sometimes I didn't hold myself accountable, and I also didn't hold others that I knew that consumed alcohol as irresponsibly as I did accountable for that phase of things. But in terms of the accountability for your everyday job and your duties and responsibilities, I always held myself to a really high standard, and that's something that's really interesting. That although my personal life was heavily affected by alcoholism, my professional life never was, and I always, did what I needed to get done. I always took care of my Marines. I always did my job. And obviously I'm speaking from personal experience, but in my opinion, I was really good at what I did. And I really loved machine guns and machine gunnery. And it was a very early obsession and passion for that. It started at the School of Infantry. I had a great combat instructor. He was phenomenal. Pushed machine gun knowledge really heavily on us, pushed that strength and that like grit and toughness very early on, where I think as someone who is in the infantry especially, it takes a certain person to really be a successful infantryman, in my opinion. And that's something that, whether I possess those qualities prior to that, I really thrived, Yeah.
So. I like that. So to back up a second, what I got from that is that alcoholism was part of your adjustment period coming back. I'm curious if you have any ideas for how maybe the Marines or the military could help better that adjustment period so that things like alcoholism doesn't have to be a part of future
Yeah,
beaching
you
Marines
know,
adjustment?
I think the biggest thing for guys, you know, and women for that matter, that coming back off of deployment, I did one combat deployment in Afghanistan from October 2010 to May of 2011, and I'm pretty honest about my experiences, and I'm also pretty open. You know, I that deployment wasn't, you know, kind of what maybe people portray or see like in some of the movies where it's like constant firefights and things are wild and crazy, and it's you know, maybe death around every corner. That deployment was really stressful on a different note.
More like Jarhead, where it's more of the psychological trauma of just being
I
there.
think
All
so. Yeah, I think so. That's an interesting. Like, yeah. But there was a little bit of, you know, more of the like kinetic side of the Marine Corps as well within that deployment. You know, one of the biggest things that happened to me on that deployment that really affected me for probably the first 6 months after I came home is the improvised explosive device threat was really high. And our battalion had the best find to strike ratio in the history of Operation Enduring Freedom. But we did hit a couple. And we were on a patrol one time on a road, and an improvised explosive device went off probably about 10 feet behind me. And there was an individual who was killed, and it was an Afghan National Army soldier. And I had walked over the same spot that he did. And when I came home, I really had some survivor's guilt, you know, and I think sometimes Marines that experience things like that, they don't necessarily address it properly. And I think that that's one of the reasons that, you know, post-combat deployment, alcoholism is so frequent. And then also some people like drug use. And the other thing I noticed too when I came back from that deployment is I rode a motorcycle, and my risky behavior was a lot more elevated than it was prior to that deployment. And it was one of those things where it was like I couldn't transition back into a less heightened level of, you know, just mild everyday life. Excuse me, you know, a term people use is civilian life, right? But and I was still in the Marine Corps. It's not like I'd gotten out after I got home from that deployment. But, you know, I really struggle with my self-identity. And, you know, you see it in some films that you see portray the military when they say, like, you know, I think Rambo's a prime example, right? Like the movie Rambo, you know, the first one where he says, like, he just never came home, right? From Vietnam. And, there's something to be said about that. I think it's, I don't want to say that I left a part of myself in Afghanistan, but there was a part of me that I felt like I had unfinished business, you know, and even, you know, even if, you know, everything would have been successful or whatever the case might be, I think a lot of guys deal with that exact thing where they come home and there's just this time period of this phase where they just don't know what to do. You know, it's kind of like you're lost in translation, you know, and I think the biggest advice that I could give to guys, and I hope that they execute on their own and do is find somebody you really trust and really have good conversations with them, and try to really like decompress and find healthy habits that you can participate in that are, this is a weird way to say this, maybe in a strange term to use, but like controlled chaos, right? Like, I'm an avid weightlifter myself, and I really enjoy weightlifting. And weightlifting for me in 2019 and even back then is a good release, right? You know, I'm burning up some, you know, testosterone. I'm, you know, moving heavy things around, and I feel like I can relieve some stress, right? You know, I know a lot of guys that get into like jujitsu or, you know, like mixed martial arts and stuff like that. And if you can find that avenue or that thing, you know, whether it be, you know, peaceful fishing on a river or, you know, fighting in a cage, if you can find those things that are responsibly, you know, reckless, I guess you could say, maybe, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but I just feel like it makes it easier to, just mentally, just flush, I turned heavily to alcohol. I drank probably more than I'd ever drank after that deployment for quite a while. And I just couldn't figure out what was going on with me. It was, like I said, I was just lost. I got in a motorcycle wreck right after I came home too from that deployment. And then I got dropped from a formal school that I was going to. And mentally I was in a bad place. And I don't know. I just wish at some point in time I would have just spoken to somebody, whether it would have been one of my fellow Marines about it, or, whether they would have came and approached me and held me accountable. I say that 10% of net negative, accountability is not there. Sometimes I think some of the hardest things to do is to have that hard truth, with some of your buddies, when your fellow Marine or something is kind of going off the deep end, and you just got to say, hey, you got to figure this out. We got to figure this out together, like I'm here for you, and I was fortunate when I got out and I got divorced from my previous wife. I had some friends that did that for me. They came up here to Southern Oregon, and they came and spent a couple of days with me, and it was really helpful. And it was a very unselfish act that I have yet to repay to them. But, I'm always here for them, and they know that. And we talk probably at least monthly, if not bi-monthly. I speak with those individuals. So,
yeah, I like that. So that was your turning point, is friends coming and helping talk, just work through it all.
Yeah, most definitely. But it wasn't until after I got out, my ex-wife was pregnant with our daughter when I left for my second deployment. And my second deployment was really difficult too, because we were a Marine Expeditionary Unit. So basically we were a group that was on an aircraft carrier, and we really just didn't have any duties and responsibilities. So we just kind of hung out on the aircraft carrier, and you're really cooped up. You're in a small space, and I mean this with no disrespect for anybody that's in the Navy, but I don't think I could be stationed on an aircraft carrier. It's too confined. But then you get to a port and you get off the boat, and you and your buddies go drink at the local bar, and then you stumble your way back to the ship. And it was a difficult time period. And again, I think it's important to be honest with myself and honest with the viewers here as well, is I was a really bad husband. I really was. And I had a pregnant wife at home, and I was not very supportive, and I can't change that, and moving forward in the relationship that I'm in now, I'm an incredibly supportive husband and a loving father and a caring father. And I do my very best to be as unselfish as I can, and it's interesting, when you look back at some self-reflection. And I tell people regularly this when we have conversations about certain things. I say the best thing I've done probably for myself in the last 5 years is I quit drinking alcohol, because for me it was a serious issue. And there's so many people out there that can handle responsibly drinking, but I wasn't one of them, and I wasn't one of them before I joined the military. And I allowed the military to, based off of the culture that was there, just kind of like explode that whole, poor habitual choices. And yeah, so.
Yeah, so that's a whole lot to unpack there. Going back a minute, you mentioned survivor's guilt. So, I mean, that's got to be a lot to come back with, feeling like that. I'm curious, was there any tension between you and the ANA while you were there?
There was tension between us and them, solely because I think myself and my fellow Marines, we really struggled with being in a foreign country like that, to what I would consider to bring a form of freedom and democracy to them. And there was a part of me that didn't really feel like they wanted that. And I felt that it was really strange. And their local forces just really didn't seem invested in defending what was theirs. And I think a lot of it too is that they weren't very educated. You know, being a third world country, they don't have a schooling system like we do. You know, their everyday needs are survivalistic. You know, I think for the average person here in the United States, even individuals that are less fortunate that, you know, are sleeping on the streets, we really have it pretty well in a first world country. Even if you live in a first world country and you're an individual who's really struggling and you live on the street, you know, there's a lot of things out here that we do for individuals to really aid and benefit them. And you know, I think one of the things that's interesting about Afghanistan, and from my experience, was here's a country who was war torn. You know, I mean, the Russians invaded, you know, long before we were ever there doing our thing, and I really felt for the local populace, to be honest. And one of the things that it allowed me to do was, I think it allowed me to have some new insight on empathy, and also just some unique experiences that what one human can do for another. And I'll give you a prime example. There was a young boy, we would sit and we would watch this road in the mornings because there was a school right there, and we had gotten some intelligence that the Taliban were trying to stop children from going to the school, and we wanted to see kids go to school and get educated, you know, young kids. And I would sit in this ditch area with this young man, and he was probably no older than about 7 or 8. And we would sit there, and in the morning he would bring me bread, and they're a term for bread over there. They call it dorde. And to be honest, it's not very good. Sometimes it's a little bit better than others, but it's I would assimilate it to like what we in the United States know as like fry bread, right? Like Native American fry bread. It's that kind of bread. Or in India, I know they have naan bread. It's really similar to that kind of texture and thickness. But if you add too much salt or you don't cook it right, it can be a little bit harder than not. But this little boy would come out every day with a piece of it, and him and I would sit and we would just eat dorde together. And you know, we didn't speak the same language. He spoke Pashto and I spoke English. You know, I knew a little bit of the foreign language there, or the native tongue there, but I didn't know much. And it was just a unique moment, you know, and I think that him and I trusted each other. And I had other, you know, relationships with individuals there that I got the chance to spend time with. And one of the terms that I thought was really interesting the Marine Corps used when we were there was they used the term hearts and minds, right? And at first, you just, as an infantry member, you know, an infantry Marine and a machine gunner, you're like, this is so stupid. You know, there's hearts and minds. You know, here I am on this combat deployment, and what my expectation is, you know, like what you see in the movies kind of, right? Sometimes I think guys get, you know, drawn into that kind of stuff. And from my experience, what I experienced over there, you don't want that. If you can avoid that, avoid it. You know what I mean? Because it's constant misery. You know, from my little bit of experience with that kind of a deployment, it wasn't fun. You know, watching people die and seeing carnage there's nothing, you know, peaceful or happy about it. It's chaos. It's, you know, it's the ultimate level of, you know, just, you know, carnage. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Was there any silver lining in it? Like, did you believe in the cause that what you're doing there was the right thing, or like was the culture shift or any of it, do you think, necessary?
You know, interestingly enough, I do believe that as a foreign force in their country, just based off of the experiences, from my understanding, I was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps at the time, so I was low on the totem pole, and I felt like there was a need for us, almost as if there is, and this is what I assimilate to in the United States, is you think about rough urban areas where there are certain individuals who maybe are economically disadvantaged, but they're just trying to live honest everyday lives. And then there's a group of individuals that's trying to take advantage and prey on others that are like drug users, you know, and they deal drugs in your neighborhood and carry a gun and you know, are what I would consider to be dangerous to the general public. And I view the Taliban as those kind of people, right? Kind of your urban area, you know, dirty drug dealer kind of character, where they really, what I felt like they did is they inflicted fear on people and they controlled them through that fear. So I thought that our presence there, in my personal opinion, was helpful, and I don't know about on the larger scale because again, if you look at it in terms of a large map, I'm a blip, I'm really small. I'm just a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps. I carry a squad automatic weapon, a light machine gun is what my job was. So I was a really small piece of the puzzle, and maybe on a larger scale, maybe, it was different, but yeah,
But do you think if the puzzle got put together, it would have came to a good solution? Like, was it making progress in terms of actually stopping it, or was it just kind of like muffling it down? Like, it's almost like the cutting off the head of the serpent kind of thing, where two more pop up.
Yeah,
because then the kids see violence happen to the adults in their community,
right,
and they just grow up more resentful. Hypothetically, I have no idea, obviously.
And I hear what you're saying, and I understand your point of view. I think one of the things that was difficult for me was there was no like consideration for the individuals that you were hurting by these individuals that were the Taliban, right? Like by planning these improvised explosive devices in just any dirt mound area that they could, during our time there, like we experienced, locals that would step on these and become casualties and even children, and it's very disheartening and from the raw sense of emotion, what I can tell for myself is it makes you angry, cause I wasn't a father then. I was just looking out for myself, and obviously I cared about children and, made the decision to have children later on. But, I just felt like they were like these bullies, and it was like the local population was stuck in such a rough spot because if they didn't support these individuals, they would be heavily scrutinized and threatened regularly, if they didn't support them. But if they did support them, they were almost the enemy to us, right? So it was definitely, they were between a rock and a hard place, and you always had to try to consider from their perspective, like what was going on, when you'd have, I didn't, like I said, I was a Lance Corporal. So, I didn't use our interpreter regularly like like my squad leader did, who was a sergeant, to, talk to the locals or anything. But I did have the opportunity to get translated and talk to some of the locals. And it's hard to know which direction do you go in. Do you follow these, gun-toting guys who are Afghanis and they're locals and they're telling you that the Marines and other forces are bad and that they're just there to hurt people, but they're out there hurting people that are local too? Or do you follow these strangers with all this gear and equipment carrying guns? I can understand their split and their indifference, and I had no hard feelings, and even after getting blown up on the road, I was upset at the fact that I expected us to be more proactive after that about finding the individuals that had done that to us, and I didn't really feel like we were. And I think when I came home, that was one of the situations that I mentally dealt with that was really a hard struggle for me is, is why didn't we do something about this? But again, I was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, so maybe we were doing things about it, and maybe I just didn't know.
Did you not get the full picture of what the end goal was with this whole process?
I don't think you do. As somebody who is a lower ranking enlisted, there's so many chains that all this information goes through that by the time it gets to you, you're getting a pretty small piece, I feel like, and as I progressed in rank, I got out as a sergeant and I was an instructor when I was a sergeant, and I still didn't feel incredibly informed. I think in order to be super informed, you got to be the guy that's in the room when they brief everybody on what's going on, and so, no, I don't think I was really, the term I would say is in the loop, right, at any time. And one of the things too is I was just following orders and I was just doing what was asked of me, and so were my fellow Marines. And like I said, I felt like a lot of things we did were what I would consider to be beneficial, right? Like holding security by the school, and we had a patrol base sitting right next to a school too. And we would go over there and play with the kids in the schoolyard and, we had, observation posts that, looked out onto the roads so they could walk home. And I was proud to be a part of a group of individuals that I felt like protected those young kids, cause I felt like, how would I feel if it was my children and they had to go to school in such a rough area, And I think that that's something sometimes that maybe gets a little lost with when it comes to, people's version of the Marine Corps, what they view as the Marine Corps, especially the infantry, is they, the term I think that was used back in the Vietnam era was, that they were baby killers, right? But, if you look deep, you're going to find some pictures of Marines that are, grabbing kids in the middle of firefights and dragging, local kids out of the way because you don't want to do that kind of thing. You don't want to harm people that are innocent, right? And again, I think that's from my logic of my experience with that is, I was there to get rid of the bad guys. I wasn't there to disrupt the local population. I wasn't there to cause problems for them. I was just there to do my job and get rid of the bad guys,
Yeah, I'm curious, was there as part of the adjustment period, you almost have to refine meaning because being over there doing such good for the world, literally saving kids of different ethnicity would bring a lot of meaning, fulfillment into your time spent.
Yeah,
so when you
definitely
came back, was there almost a lapse of, now what am I going to do?
Yeah. To some degree, I think, like I said, I think sense of purpose is crucial, and that's where I'm at right now with my life, present time. I have a pretty solid sense of purpose and I'm fulfilled by serving others, and I think that that's a really great way to live your life. And back then when I came home from that deployment, it was kind of one of those things where, like you asked about, like, did you know the end goal? And I said I didn't, and so based off of that, it's one of those things where you almost have to ask yourself, like, well, what was I really doing? And
do you think it would have helped with morale if you did know the bigger picture of what you were working toward?
I don't know, because what
confusing?
if it was awful and negative? I don't know. Maybe the intent of what we were doing wasn't necessarily what I would have supported. So then what would I have done? I was contractually a part of that, so and I think that that's something that individuals struggle with within. There's and you've heard this terminology before, I know, for yourself, but or this quote, you hear the quote, "All's fair in love and war," right? I think that's saying is kind of bogus, but war has moments, I think, where there's really awful things that happen, and it's depending on how you look at it, it's really difficult for individuals who have never been a part of it to really see what it, and even today we see the footage of, what's happening in Syria and some of these like airstrikes that we do and different things like that. And I don't know the whole picture. So I can't attest to whether what we're doing is good or bad or indifferent, but I think coming home, I wish I would have done something different in the sense where, like, I wish I would have found like a boys and girls club to go like coach youth sports at, or, I wish I would have went and tried to play football in the Marine Corps, base football team, or there's a lot of things that I wish I would have done. And a lot of my younger guys have been getting out of the military in the last couple of years. And when I talk to these guys that were my younger Marines, like I try to tell them, like, cause take some time when you get out and just really figure out who you are still, cause when I got out, I took a whole summer and then I started school. I started going to community college, but I went camping a lot. I spent a lot of time by myself, actually. I rode my motorcycle a lot, and it was helpful. It was like I needed time to fully process what had happened, what I was a part of, all the positives that came out of it, some of the negatives that came out of it. The loss of, that close-knit unit that I now don't have, right? I think that's a big thing for a lot of guys too when they get out, is it's like being a part of this massive family, like you're a member of the Brady Bunch, and then all of a sudden they're like, all right, you're 18, move on out. And then you're like, what? And then you don't see them anymore. That's kind of how I felt with the Marine Corps when I got out, is I felt isolated and I felt a little lost, and I I didn't really know what was next. I didn't have a next, you know, and I figured it out. I took some time and I figured it out, but it was it was crucial for me to really recognize that self-reflection and really figure out my identity, you know? And like I said, I went to counseling. Like one of the first things I did when I got out is I went to the VA and I got tested for post traumatic stress disorder. And they came back and said, "We don't feel like you have post traumatic stress disorder. You're in the process of getting divorced. You know, you're dealing with visitation issues with your child. You know, we feel like you're having transitioning anxiety. Transition anxiety is what they told me." And I said, "Okay," you know, and then I went to a civilian psychiatrist and I did the same thing. I had them run me through some psychological evaluations, and they came back and said almost the exact same thing. And I never told them that I went to the VA. So I said, okay, I just got to deal with this. I have to transition and I have to figure it out. And it took me some time. It really did. It took me, I would say, at least 3 months, if not probably 6, you know, until I really felt like I was like starting to kind of figure things out and really get into like a good rhythm of life and, you know.
Yeah. And so if talking helped the most, did you try anything like CBD or any sort of medicines that would help?
No, I never did. You know, I know a lot of guys that are veterans that, you know, do that kind of stuff, and I have a very neutral view of it. I personally don't do it, but I can see the health benefits for some individuals, and I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I think anything, if used improperly, can be a bad thing. You know, like one of the things I did right before I got out of the Marine Corps is I quit drinking coffee. I drink coffee again now, but back then I was drinking like probably a pot a day. So I was drinking like 5 to 6 cups a day, you know, and so you're talking about anywhere from, you know, 700 to 850 milligrams of caffeine, and that's not sustainable. That's not healthy for your body. You know, now I probably drink coffee, you know, maybe every day or every other day, and I'm like a 1.5 cupper kind of guy. I have a little tiny, I specifically bought a coffee pot that's only a 4 cupper, and I probably give it about, you know, a little under half. And because it keeps me honest, I think, and it keeps me, you know, from relying on a specific type of substance, right? But again, I think there's so many things out there for guys, and one of the best things that I wish I still did regularly, and I should, you know, once I get more comfortable in this new profession and start working and get into a good work pattern, I really liked yoga. I really liked it. There was something to be said. I took a class when I was at Oregon State, a yoga class, and it was perfect timing. It was winter term. It was in this building where there was a glass ceiling above me, and it rained, and it was peaceful, and, you know, we listened to the, you know, yoga type of music, and I really liked it. I really did. You know, if you would ask me a year before that, like, oh, would you ever take yoga? I would say, no, I'm not a yoga kind of guy, you know, but I think that there's so many different modalities out there. You know, like one of the things I find interesting is like the equine therapy, right? Like the horses thing for some individuals is probably phenomenal. I personally, I get freaked out by horses. I wasn't around horses as a child. So for me, the horse thing kind of freaks me out. So the equine therapy thing would be a negative option for me. But like I said, yoga was great. You know, I've heard meditation's great. Kayaking, motorcycle riding. I mean, you know, there's something to be said, you know, the term I use is wind therapy, but there's something to be said about riding a motorcycle. I think it's really peaceful if you can do it in a manner that's on your terms, you know, and I'm sorry if you live in Portland or LA or, you know, Seattle, and that's hard, you know, because you live in a big city, but hey, you know, take a ride, get out of the city, you know, take the 45 minutes, however long it takes you to get out of the city, and then you're on a, you know, 2-lane road somewhere, you know, hitting some curves, and it's great, you know, and so you got to find what really works for you, I think. And what works for me doesn't work for everybody else, right? Like for me, weightlifting works really well for me, and motorcycle riding works well for me, but
maybe horses for another person.
And horses for another person, and maybe sailing, or, you know, kayaking, or, you know, there's fly fishing, or there's so many things, hunting, or, you know, there's so many different avenues that, you know, that work great for
After going through all this, would you let one of your kids join the Marines?
You know, I have a 10-month-old son, and I have another son on the way due in October, and I would actually. And I know that seems interesting, and I would even be okay with my children joining the infantry, even in a wartime. To
Your
be
daughter?
honest, huh?
Your daughter?
My daughter as well. Oh, most definitely. Yeah, yeah. I think that's for me something to be said is, having a daughter, is interesting as a dad. It's different, And one of the things I've learned about having a daughter, it men and women are just wired differently. We really are, and my daughter and I have a great relationship, but there's some moments where her and I are just completely on a different page, and we struggle with simple tasks like brushing our hair or getting dressed, and it's interesting because it's I as a male I am a little different than her realistically, but my goal with her and as a parent, I want to make sure that my daughter understands what a good man looks like. And I want to be a good dad to my daughter so when she goes out and gets married, that she marries somebody who has characteristics and has a sense of character like I do. If my daughter marries somebody who's a lot like me, I'm okay with that. Because I think I have really good sense of character, So
I like that. And you think the Marines helped build that?
I really do, to be honest. I think some other things helped build that as well, that were really crucial to me, and some of them I neglected, and
Such as?
my stepfather being one. I had a really rough relationship with my stepfather when I was a teenager, and I really struggled because my father was kind of absent in my life as a child, and I always felt that my stepfather was really hard on me, and at times I think he probably was hard on me, but his intent was always my best interest. He knew that some of the choices that I was making were going to negatively impact me and this is a silly way to say this, but if I just would have listened, if I just would have listened, I would have saved myself some heartache probably, and I would have saved myself some bumps and bruises on the road of life, and especially in the last, 5 years or so, him and I's relationship has become exponentially better. And he's a phenomenal grandfather to my children. He's amazing with my daughter. He's, great with my baby boy. And I know he will be with, my child, my son born in October, and so the other individuals that would be secondary to that, to him, I think is, my football coaches and my wrestling coach. I was really fortunate. I got really lucky. I had phenomenal coaches. My head football coach when I was in high school would always tell us regularly about respecting women, about opening the door for them, about, respecting your elders, being honest, and back then, I think as a high school kid, I was just kind of like, zoned out thinking about what I was going to do 30 minutes from when practice ended rather than absorbing it. But looking back, just having him chirping in my ear regularly was super beneficial for me. It really was. It was something that I needed, and I really I thrived on later, I think. And I had a phenomenal position coach. I played offensive and defensive line. He's a head football coach now, and he was great. He was, stern, and he, had a high tempo level. He always demanded, 110% out of you. He always held you accountable. And I really loved it. I really did. My wrestling coach, same way. My wrestling coach was a lot like the line coach where, it was no BS. It was, it was one way or the other. It was pretty black and white. And I thought it was super beneficial for my well-being. And that's, one of the reasons that I'm moving into the professions that I am, to be honest.
I like that. I think more people should encourage their daughters to get more into sports and stuff like that.
Most definitely.
I'm getting super into badminton, and both my mom and my spouse, it's just like the hand-eye coordination isn't quite there. And throwing the baseball, it's like people almost think down on teaching them these basic things. And I'm like, I think that should be more promoted than anything. But
yeah, I agree. I want my daughter to be very explorative when it comes to athletics. She's been in gymnastics regularly now for about the last 2 years, and I like it. I think it's great. I think it helps her with the heebie-jeebies. She's a young kindergarten kid now, and she's about to be in first grade this next year, and she needs sports. She needs athletics. And I want her to explore more athletics. Like one of the things I think will be interesting is she likes to race. She likes to run. And so maybe later on she'll be a runner, or, maybe she'll be a basketball player, or a volleyball player, or, heck, maybe she'll play football. I don't,
Yeah.
I want my daughter to find the athletic activities that she really enjoys, and not just the athletic activities. I think I want her to, if she really likes music, let's do music. I didn't do music, but let's do music. If she gets to the age where she's starting to be introduced to more instruments, which I really sure hope that schools don't cut those programs, because liberal arts are crucial, man. Whether it's music or art or drama, those classes are great. Those items are so important to your intelligence. They open new avenues of pathways within your neurological system that are they're crucial. I just want my children to do what they want to do. And it's funny because coaching sports, like being a football coach, it's like listening to parents that meet my son. They're oh, he's gonna grow up and be a football player. I don't know that, and you don't know that either. Maybe my son, ends up playing water polo. I don't know what my son ends up doing, and whatever he does is fine. I am completely accepting of that, and I want to make sure that I foster an environment that no matter what my children do, whether it's modeled by me and because I'm a high school football coach, Dad, I want to play high school football, or whether it's
the opposite of that. I want
right,
nothing
whether
to do
it's
with it.
Dad, I'm really into choir. Great. Let's, figure out how to make you the best singer we can.
Do you think you getting raised the way you did maybe make you think, I don't want to be that, or I want to raise my kids exactly differently? Or?
Most definitely. Well, at a crucial age, I think, I was 6 when my parents divorced, and it was hard. It was really hard. And there was about a 4-year time span when life was really hard for my mother and I. And I think my dad being an absent father like he was, I think it led me to be the best father I could be. I think and not to my daughter though, which is interesting, not to my daughter years ago. Now, most definitely. But when my daughter was young, until my ex-wife and I divorced, I was a bad dad. I really was. And I wish I could go back and maybe clean some of that up, but I have to continue to move forward, and an analogy that I really like that I heard some time ago was, you look at life like it's looking out of a windshield of a car, and the front window is so large and the rearview mirror is just small. Why waste your time looking behind you? Keep looking forward. And for me, I'm gonna keep looking forward because I want to be the dad that my dad wasn't. I want to be the stepfather to my sons that, maybe if things would have been a little different when my stepfather first came into my life, he could have been for me. Or maybe if I would have been more accepting, right? And having a step parent, with my daughter, having a stepmother with my wife, that relationship is super important to me. And my wife is 100 times better than I think I would be as a step parent. She does an incredible job. People wouldn't even second guess whether or not that child is from her and I, because she's amazing. I mean, she does such great things with her. She encourages her, and she, explores, new craft and art activities. And she's just constantly always trying to push her in a direction where, what I would consider to be, successful women of the future move into. And I'm really fortunate that I'm married to a woman who is a very unique woman. She's very rare in my opinion, and that's nothing against women, but I think that my wife possesses some qualities that make her not just an incredible mother, but an incredible woman for her gender and her species. She's very unique, and I couldn't have like I said, I'm really blessed. I couldn't have gotten any more fortunate than I am. Yeah,
I like it. And so what is in your front mirror, front windshield?
Yeah, front windshield. So I just recently got hired at a local high school here. Just teaching half-time for now as a physical education teacher, and I'll substitute the other days that I'm not teaching. And I just recently started with that football program, helping the coaching staff out and probably coach an offensive and defensive line this year. And I'm really excited about it. And in the front windshield for me, obviously I have another child, my wife and I are due in October, and it's stressful and exciting at the same time because, my wife, 2 children in 13 months is biologically, it's a lot.
It's not a lot of sleep.
It's not a lot of sleep. It's heavy. But again, my wife's phenomenal, man. And I couldn't do it. I don't think I could, to be honest. I think I'm a pretty tough person, but, gosh, she's incredible, man. She's, very unique. And, with that being said, like in terms of like coaching sports and things like that, 5 years from now, I'd like to be a head football coach somewhere, and I need some more coaching experience, and I need a little bit more work, and I need to put some more tools in my toolbox. But I'm excited for that day, and who knows where the future takes me from there. I'm always looking. I'm always looking up. I'm not one of those people that settles. I never would have thought that I ever go to college. I went to college. Now I have a bachelor's degree in kinesiology and a master's of arts and teaching. 10 years ago, if you would have said someday in the near future you're going to go to college, I would have said there's no way. I will never attend college because it's not for me. But I feel really fortunate that I was driven in the path that I was, and I went to college, and that's, I don't think college is for everybody. I think that there's a lot of people that should pursue other paths, but pursue something. Always be looking for what is next. I think is always crucial. I'm never sitting on anything. I'm always looking at the next steps. Like, what's in front of me? What's my next obstacle, right? And I think that is crucial for men and women. You should always have that kind of mindset. I think that's.
I like that. So when you do have days where you get stuck in a glue trap, barely want to get out of bed, how do you motivate yourself to actually move forward? Because some days it feels like, it's
hard. Yeah, it really is hard. What's interesting is I listen to a lot of like motivational, inspirational stuff, and I'll tell you, having children at the age that my children are, I'm a stay-at-home dad right now, and again,
score.
I feel for those stay-at-home dads out there, man, because it's hard. It's hard, and especially, the last 3 weeks, my daughter just went home for a couple of weeks. She'll be back, third week of July. And having a 10-month-old son and a 6-year-old daughter is really rough because my 6-year-old daughter wants to do things that we can't do with my 10-month-old son. So we got to find the compromise and the things that work. And gosh, like I said, I have a whole new perspective from my experience with stay-at-home moms, man, because it's a hard gig, So, if you're that husband that comes home and you feel like your wife isn't doing her everyday duties around your home, you might want to, ask her how her day was in terms of.
It all breaks down to communication.
It's hard. I mean, it really is. And but with that being said, I think one of the things that's really crucial in general when it comes to having that good mindset and having that ability to overcome the grog, like I kind of lost, I got on a side note and lost my train of thought, but having children like I have at the age that I have, if I want to go to the gym, I have to get up at like 3 a.m.
Holy cow.
So there's a couple days a week where I'll drag myself out of bed at 3 a.m. And like you said about how do you get up when you don't want to get up. And I listened to this woman, I don't remember her name, to be honest. And, I wish I did, I'd give her credit. But she said one of the things she started doing was she would count down, just like it was like the, space shuttle lifting off. And she would count from 5 and she would just say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And she'd get up. And she knew if she didn't get up within that 5 seconds from when her alarm went off. So my alarm goes off at 3 o'clock. I set 2 alarms. I set one for 3. I set one for 3:05. When the 3 o'clock one goes off, I'll lay there sometimes and I'll dread it because maybe I was up for an hour in the middle of the night or whatever the case may be. But then, I'm sitting there and I'm like, gosh, the other alarm's about to go off. And then the alarm goes off. And then when that second alarm goes off, it's like, you got to get up. You got to get up right now. Like you got to get up. If you do not get up, you will not accomplish the things that you want to accomplish before 7 a.m. when your wife needs to get ready for work and you need to be home, stay-at-home dadding. So I get up, and another thing that I got to say that's super important is I have an incredible support system. You know, I have an amazing mother who, you know, I speak with daily, and we have a phenomenal relationship. I have an incredibly supportive stepfather. I have an amazing mother-in-law and an amazing father-in-law that are super supportive of me. And, you know, obviously, last but not least, is my wife. My wife is incredibly important. She is, if my wife, in my opinion, is probably in my life is the equivalent of, the voice with reason. It's like she holds me accountable for my behavior. She is constantly making sure that I'm progressing in life. She's always having conversations with me on things I could be improving. Like, I'm not telling people to go out there and find some hard wife that's difficult at times to deal with, but my wife, I'm glad I'm married to an alpha female that's a hard wife, because it makes me so much better. I think that one of the things that, I don't know who said it, but the whole comment about, behind every good man, there's a good woman, and the way I look at that whole comment is, next to every good man is a good woman, and standing next to me is my wife. Without my wife, I'm not who I am. And that's true. That's just really, that's the rawest form of it.
Yeah, that's a pretty common theme in your life. It seems like just having a good figure to just kind of keep you going between your football coach and I assume your sergeant and then your wife.
Yeah.
But here, to go back a minute, you said the real turning point between adjusting to normal life from coming back overseas and being the man you are today was a talk with friends and stuff. And so what are some of the things that they instilled in you that made the change?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was when I got out. A really good friend of mine lives down in Southern California. Him and I had some really hard conversations where he was really quick to tell me, he's like, hey, you need to get your stuff together. You need to get your act together, dude. Like, you need to, figure out what you're going to do and get real with it. And I thank him regularly for that, because that hard friendship is necessary. Like, if you have friends in your life that when everything's going great, they're always there and they always want to spend time with you, that's great. But if you want some real friends, you need to find some friends that when times get hard, your friends are there. And those are the good friends.
To hold you accountable.
Right. You got to find friends that sometimes are willing to call you out and tell you. I do this to people all the time. I think I'm pretty good at calling people out and saying, hey, what are you doing? That's, like I tell my high school football players sometimes, and this is an interesting philosophy, but, I tell high school kids sometimes, I say, it's hard to be good. It's easy to be bad. And they're confused when I say it. They don't get it. What do you mean it's hard to be good? Well, think about it like this, and this is the way I point it to them is, as a 16, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, if you're walking on the street and the person in front of you drops $10 and you're behind them, you pick up the $10, you can either catch up to them and tap them on the shoulder, introduce yourself to a complete stranger, hand them back the $10 bill, let them know they dropped it, or you can put that money in your pocket and walk away. It's way easier to put that money in your pocket and walk away. But if you want to do the right thing, you're going to catch up to that person. You're going to tap them on the shoulder. You're going to say, hey, sir or ma'am, you dropped this $10. I just want to let you know, right? And one of the things that's crucial, I think, with that happened to me recently, my daughter and I were at the grocery store, and the gentleman who was the cashier gave me too much change. And I went back. I was all the way out in the parking lot, and I went back inside, and I gave him, it was like 53 cents. And I was like, hey, sir, you gave me too much change back. And there was a couple of reasons I did it. One, because I want to do the right thing. And then two, I want my daughter to see that when situations like that happen, do the right thing here. You know what I mean? And that's, like I said, again, I'll say it again, is it's easy to be bad. It's hard to be good. Sometimes it is. It really is. And maybe some people would say, I disagree with that. But, look at scenarios and see which ones, yeah.
Yeah, taking that to the extreme, though. Imagine a situation where maybe your kid accidentally got accepted to very prestigious college or something over someone who's more qualified. Would you really...
Would you say something?
Right? When it really benefits someone that's close to.
Well, this is the way I'd look at it, I think, is if my child is not deserving as much as somebody else's child that deserves to go to that school and has put in way more work than my child to go to that school, I want my child to be the one that steps forward. So I'll have that hard conversation with my child and say, hey, that there's a mix up here because of, that your GPA got mixed up or your transcripts got mixed up with somebody else. That ain't you. You didn't have an 1820 on the SAT or whatever the high score is. I don't know. I got like 1100.
ACT. Oh,
SAT, yeah. Well, I think they still take SAT?
SAT is like 1200s and whatever, and
Is it
ACT
1200?
is like 20.
All right, well, maybe I got an 800. I don't remember. But, if that's the case, I want my daughter or son to say, you're right, Dad. Like, I gotta make this phone call, and I gotta take care of this, or I gotta send this email, and I gotta take care of this, because there's times when stuff like that happens, right? Where, I'm in a weird, maybe I shouldn't be somewhere or whatever. And the other thing too, I think it's interesting that I noticed with coaching football is there's a lot of times when people don't recognize the people behind the scenes, like there's a lot of people that make things work and move. And I think one of the things that I'm going to make sure that I do as a head football coach is that I recognize those people. I recognize the people that runs the chains for me on Friday nights. I recognize the moms and the dads that are carting their kids around from practice and going to games and making, pregame meals for my football players and, all these other people that are involved. I think it's so important, to make sure that you recognize those people. They don't need a lot. All they really want to hear. And I think that's one of the things that in the last couple of years that I've been coaching has made me what I would consider a successful and unique coach is, I'm always trying to serve. Like I don't want to win football games. You know what I mean? I want to win the battles of teaching young men to be the best men that they can be, and women too, for that matter. I know you're seeing more women than ever playing football, and I think I support it. I'm all for it, to be honest. If women want to come play football for me, I'm going to hold you to the exact same standard that I do my men. So,
A question along those lines. If you were to go back and do another tour, a kind of hot topic right now is, would you be okay having a trans person in your...
As long as they can do their job. I don't care. I don't care. That stuff does not faze me at all, to be honest. As long as you can do your job and you act professionally.
Do you think that's the general consensus within people who would actually be in the groups with them?
No,
or do
I
you
don't
think it's
so.
just some random higher up that they don't like it?
No, I don't think so. I serve with a gentleman who, upon his discharge, came out that he was gay. And I think the reason that he waited to come out that he was gay was because of the scrutiny he would have experienced from his fellow Marines. So, it's hard. Not everybody is as loving as you would like them to be. But I think one of the things that's said is for those individuals, if you're going to be that transgender Marine, like, you better be the best damn transgender Marine you've ever seen. You know what I mean? You better go get after it, So, like, if you really want to, break down all the stigma and all the stereotypes and whatever else might be said. Same thing with female. Nowadays we're seeing a transition where we're seeing female Marines in the infantry. If you want to be a female Marine in the infantry, you better be able to hold the standard of the male Marine that's in the infantry. That's the bottom line. That's the way I look at it. Is if this is an opportunity that you want to pursue, you better be on top of your game, and you better, I don't think you should be treated less accepted or that you should be treated more accepted. I think that you should be treated the exact same way. I look at it, like I said, same thing on the football field. I look at it, same thing on the football field. If I have a young woman who wants to play football on my football team, whatever position we
think
as a
that'd be
whole.
Okay for someone who just physically is smaller and doesn't have as much testosterone to play against big 300-pound people? They get brain damage. That's not okay.
I think that one of the things to be said is that that's a choice they have to make, and that their parents have to make. You know what I mean? And if I have a young lady who wants to play football, I have to do my best to protect her, right? And her parents have to do their best to protect her. So, again, I think sometimes, like you just said, if I am a young female and I'm 5'4", 115 pounds, and I decide I want to play high school football, the possibility of me getting hurt is high. I tell high school boys the same thing.
It is.
High school boys that are, some boys,
Would you let your son play football with the risk of TBI,
yeah.
how it is?
Oh, most definitely.
Wow.
Most definitely.
So what do you think the benefits that you got from it that would counteract or maybe overpower the...
I had a couple concussions in high school, but one of the things I'll say about my experiences is I learned because of those experiences that I had in high school football. Like, I learned, one of the things I learned that the Marine Corps also exemplified was when the going gets tough, the tough keep going, right? And I think that that is crucial for young men and young women. I think that that's something too. That's why I think women's sports is phenomenal. And it's unfortunate that, like you are hearing some publicity lately about like the U.S. women's soccer team, right? They're getting ready to play for a World Cup. That's exciting. Like, but if it was a U.S. men's soccer team, it'd be everywhere, right? So why do we do that? Why aren't these women as emphasized and as? Because I want my daughter to see those
more
women.
role models.
I want her to see those girls that are gymnasts that are out there, doing great things, or those softball players, or those basketball players, or those volleyball, or cheerleaders, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want
female jiu-jitsu players.
Participants, female jiu-jitsu fighter. Yeah, I want combat sports, that females that are in combat sports. I don't really watch Ultimate Fighting Championships very often, but from the highlights that I've seen of some of those women that are fighting in there, those women are getting after it. You know what I mean? And I think it's awesome. I think another thing too that's to be said about that too that's interesting is like women's wrestling. I think it's great. I think women's wrestling is phenomenal. I think that the difficulty is for years ago, before we have now, what we have is we have women's wrestling category where if I'm a 120-pound woman, I'm going to wrestle another 125-pound woman or 120-pound woman. Where back in the day, I think one of the things that happened to those young girls that were wrestling is at 120 pounds, I'm wrestling 120-pound boys. And again, I'm no scientist. I'm not an expert, but a 120-pound boy is biologically built different than a 120-pound girl.
Well, just hormones alone, bone density.
Right. Most definitely. And
you'd be okay with your daughter fighting men of the same weight?
No, not men. Definitely not men. No,
Okay.
not in a combat sport sense.
Football's a combat sport. You can't even argue.
Football is a very physical game, and if my daughter made the decision that she said, Dad, let's say my daughter's 6, so I can't attest to her height and weight when she's 16. Yeah. But let's say my daughter is 16 and she's 5. I'm pretty tall. I'm 6'1". My wife's 5'5".
5'9", 140.
5'9", 140 pounds. I have a realistic, honest conversation with her about the risks that could happen if she decides to participate in the sport. But I don't discourage her. And I know that seems really wild to say, but if it's something that she really wants to do and she says, Dad, because my daughter's going to grow up watching football. I'm a football guy. We watch football she watches football in the stands on Friday nights. She watches football on television on Saturday afternoons in the college game. And she watches football on Sundays when we watch Green Bay games. So, my daughter's going to have a ton of exposure to football, and if if she ever reaches the point, right now she'll sit and kind of watch the games and then go upstairs or whatever. But, I'm not going to force her to sit and watch football with me. But again, let's say she, hypothetically speaking, she just loves the game of football and she's like, Dad, I want to play football. I'm gonna explain all the risk and everything. Same thing I do to my sons.
But kids can't possibly comprehend. Yeah, when you're like 60, maybe even 40,
right?
You might start developing horrible brain diseases earlier than someone. They're like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's
true. Well, I think one of the biggest things that is unfortunate so today's game I think is changing. And as a high school football coach, obviously I'm going to defend the game, but we're teaching way better technique and skills when it comes to tackling than we ever were, right? It used to be, put your helmet on your chest, run through the numbers.
Head up.
We don't do that no more, right? Head up. We don't do that no more. Now we teach, outside shoulder. You're not tackling cross body, right? You're tackling the direction that they're flowing. There's a company out there right now called USA Football, and they run a thing called the Advanced Tackling System, and it's phenomenal. And I think that tackling is crucial, and safe tackling is so imperative to the game of football. Like,
like rugby.
Yes, and that's what it is it's a combination of rugby and football tackling, because rugby don't wear equipment. But one of the things that happens with equipment, and we're on a wayside topic here, but with equipment, it makes you it increases the speed at which you're willing to impact another person. Because of equipment. It's the same thing we do with like race cars, right? Mm-hmm. We build these race cars, we put more equipment in them, we put more safety stuff in them, all of a sudden I'm driving a little bit faster. It's cause and effect, you know what I mean? So, but no, if my daughter legitimately said, Dad, I want to play football, Would I be scared? Yes. Will I be scared as a dad who has sons who might play football? Yeah. But I'd be just as scared of them playing basketball and coming down off a rebound and landing funny and breaking their leg. You know, I'm, you know what I mean? But there's something to be said about, it's like motorcycle riding, right? You know, 5 years ago, I got in a motorcycle wreck. I fractured my patella on my right leg. And
how long do you take before you jump back on the bike?
9 months.
9 months?
Maybe 9 months. I didn't own a bike. My bike was totaled. So I didn't own a bike that was in September. I bought another bike in April. So it was 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, something like that. 7, 8 months, something like that. Yeah, but I was a little hesitant at first, but
especially with family.
Thank goodness I got back on a motorcycle. I think my mother hates that I ride a motorcycle. She can't handle it, but she can't stand it. But I really like riding motorcycles, and that's, you know, that's a part of me. It's a part of my identity, and not in the sense where like I live a lifestyle that you know the general population would consider to be like a biker, but I really like riding motorcycles. I really like lifting weights. I like doing outdoor activities. There's a lot of things that I enjoy that, you know, unless you really spend some quality time with me, you wouldn't know, right? And I think that's what makes me very unique, right? Is I think sometimes that we as individuals, you know, there was a guy within our program, for instance, that graduated the year I did, and he had a like shortcut beard, he had a long hair that he put in a man bun, and him and I had a chemistry class together over summer, and I told him too throughout the chemistry class toward the end, I said, I'd have never thought you and I would ever become friends. And he said, why? I said, because you're completely different than the way you look. But there's something to be said about that. Like, get to know the people that that when you see the aesthetic, you're like, oh, you know, the girl with pink hair and the, you know, big gauges in her ears, like, she could be awesome. She could be a phenomenal human being. Why not get to know her? You know, have a conversation with her, and maybe she's awful. You don't know that. Neither do I. You know what I mean? Like, some of the most awful people I've ever met are the most intelligent, you know, well-mannered, but they just don't care about their fellow man or woman.
Or themselves,
for that matter. They're just ridiculously selfish, and it's like they live in some sort of a pseudo world.
I think it's almost like a trap. Like, it's not until you really start actually devoting yourself to helping other people that you actually.
Oh, most definitely, definitely, and that's something I didn't learn until about 4 years ago. It took me a really long time to learn the value of serving others. Like, there really is something to be said about going out and serving other people. Like, I live my life now for my wife and my daughter and my sons.
Yeah, what I kind of got about all that is that I'm like, how do you get out of glue trap? And you went on this story, and what I mostly got from it is that you bring on burdens, such as kids and lots of things. And I do believe burdens can help bring meaning and get you up in the morning.
Oh, but most definitely.
So to take a complete left turn here.
Yeah, let's do
I've always been curious when you're in basic training or wherever you are for the Marines.
Yeah.
And you learn how to use a light machine gun. Is it a completely different world learning how to use it and then actually using it in the more real world? I mean, it's always the real world, but you know what I mean.
Yes and no. I think yes, because you create. Okay, so as a machine gunner myself, like I said,
were you like up on a tank? Or just carrying around?
I was on the ground. I was with what's called a line company, so I was on the ground.
How much that weigh?
27.1 pounds. So we carried M240 Bravos is what we carried.
Someone else carry the ammo?
Sometimes, depends. You'll carry a little bit of ammo with you as a gunner. So usually how it works is your machine gun teams are made up of a team leader, a gunner, and an ammo man. The team leader and the gunner are in the prone position on a support by fire position or whatever. Maybe you're on a patrol. Maybe it's just the gunner by himself. But and then your ammo man is usually at the rear. He provides rear security, and he has extra ammunition, and he runs the ammunition up to you when you need ammo. And one of the interesting things about machine gun teams and also what they call a machine gun section, because there's 2 teams per squad, there's 3 squads per machine gun section. And I held the billet of all those positions at one time. So I was a gunner. I never was an ammo man, but I was a gunner, a team leader, a squad leader, and a section leader. And throughout that phase and throughout that time, the importance of each one of those positions, and this is the beauty of the Marine Corps, and I think the beauty of football as well, in my opinion, the importance of those positions is crucial, and every person that has a job and a responsibility has to do their job and responsibility. So if you're not carrying your weight and you're not doing your end, things don't go right and they don't maneuver well and they might still operate, but they're not going to operate at full capacity. And what I was going to say about the realism behind using a machine gun in a combat environment versus using a machine gun, say on like a range where you're shooting targets, if you cater your training right, you can train your Marines to as closely simulate that combat experience as you can. And the Marine Corps, in my opinion, does a phenomenal job about that. We put a lot of scenarios forward. You know, one of the things that I always thought that was really awesome with the Marine Corps is one of the things they do is they use amputees, and you enter a house where there's casualties, and they're actually individuals that are missing limbs. I think that is incredibly great because it's great training to have to walk in and literally you're looking at somebody, even though it's not like they're missing a limb in the moment where they just lost a limb, they're missing a limb. And I remember going through that. They call it a kill house. I think it's a kill house, maybe it's a casualty house, but it doesn't matter. But I remember going through that and I remember just being like, whoa. Like at first I was like, this guy doesn't have a leg, you know, but how incredible is that one, he's willing to come out there and help Marines train, you know, by being a simulated casualty who's actually missing a limb that you might experience in a combat zone. You know, I mean, like I said, I can only attest to the Marine Corps. I can't attest to other branches of the military, but in my opinion, that some of the majority of the training that the Marine Corps does is incredibly efficient and always, depending on your job or your, you know, like as an infantryman, our training was designed to prepare you for combat readiness. That was what your training was always. We were always, you know, out shooting, you know, and there's some things where there's something to be said about muscle memory, right? Like just shooting in a static position where there's not chaos around you. You have to get good at that before you can get good at the other things. But we train the other things too. We shoot on the move, you know, we shoot moving, we shoot from vehicles.
And so what would your goal be for this? Would you go to a specific town, like save a casualty that got...
So usually what they do, one of the things that the Marine Corps does a really good job about is they build these like simulated cities on bases. And don't get me wrong, they're not like up to scale in the sense where they use Connex boxes and they cut doors and windows in them. But they call it MOUT, M-O-U-T. So it's Military Operations in Urban Terrain. And it's very helpful to go into a setting that simulates what you would experience in a city. And I think that a good example of if you're not used to that, how it can be very detrimental to you, is on my second deployment, we went over and we trained with the Australian Army. And they had some of those like towns, these military operations in urban terrain towns, but they weren't used to it. And our small force was capable of simulatingly taking out their entire force.
Do you like paintball guns? How do you simulate that?
Usually you use blanks, but sometimes you'll use
blanks.
Yeah, just blank ammunition. Yeah. So usually you have somebody who will go with one part of the unit that will be like an observer. So if they see muzzle flashes in the direction, they would say you're dead, or you got shot, and then that person would be down. Yeah. And they would the observer, they call it a personal safety officer, but that person would say you got shot in the chest, or you got shot in the leg, or you got shot in the head, and you know you're not dead but you're bleeding, and or you lost an eye, or you know so. And then the other thing you use is you do use paintball rounds. They're called sim rounds, and they're like a 9mm cartridge casing, and they have a little tiny paintball round at the end of them. They're incredible because, again, one of the things is you actually get impacted then, you know, and it doesn't hurt. Like if you get hit bare skin from very close, which again is a safety procedure.
Well, even with blanks at that distance, right?
No, but the blanks don't fire any sort of, and there's no projectile.
But close up, if you get shot close up with a blank, you can get injured.
But we would have to be, my muzzle would almost have to be touching you. It would have to be within 6 to 12 inches of you. Yeah. And what would happen is the gunpowder that was emitted, but you do have a device on the end of the barrel of the weapon that's called a blank firing adapter. That device doesn't really allow a lot of pressure to come out. So could you get burned? Yes. Have I ever seen anybody have it happen to them? No.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah. So, but again, one of the safety's paramount when it comes to those situations. I've heard stories about Marines going from live firing situations to blank firing situations, and Marines having live ammunition in their magazines and end up shooting other Marines. And that's scary. But
That's
that's why
scary.
you always implement safety is paramount. And it should be. Just saying, I feel the same way about football. In my opinion, safety is paramount. I want to teach my football players how to tackle properly.
Did you say the Australian military was there too?
That was where we were. We were in Australia.
You were in Australia.
On my second deployment, yeah, we were. So as a Marine Expeditionary Unit, we went to Australia for 6 weeks, and we spent 6 weeks in Australia, and it was great. I had a good time. Australia was incredible. I really liked the Australian Army. They were great to work with. They were incredible.
And so was the boat outside Australia that you were stationed on?
No, we flew. We flew from Okinawa, Japan to Australia.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, and then when we came back, we got on the boat, and it was only my company of Marines that went and did that. And the reason for that is because we were the helicopter company, and we were selected for some. Maybe there was other reasons. Like I said, I was only corporal at that point. So,
would you ever go back for a third tour?
Now,
Yeah.
like at 33 years old, probably about 80 pounds less weight, and I miss it at times. I really do. I miss the Marine Corps.
What parts of it would you miss?
Oh, I miss machine guns to the max. There's something to be said about firing a machine gun if you get the opportunity to do it. I emphasize anybody to go do it. It's very unique. There's something to be said about the capability of the device you're using, right? Like it's powerful in the sense where it can inflict extreme damage on whatever you are pointing in the direction of or firing at. Having that kind of power within your control is very unique, in my opinion. And I can see how individuals can become, very like power focused and like power driven and hungry, because it's very different. It's the best way to describe it is you have to do it to really experience it. It's in my opinion, like especially a weapon system that I would use as an example is the Mod Deuce 50 cal, right? The Browning Mod Deuce 50 cal, like very unique weapon system, and fires a large projectile at a pretty fast rate of fire, and it's very unique. Like it's I don't know what else to accumulate it to. Maybe like sexual intercourse. It's very unique. I'm telling you, it's a very unique experience.
Nice, I like that. Yeah. Well, that's a whole lot to unpack there. Something that I've kind of been curious about is you came in touch with the people that you were over there with?
Yeah, not a lot of them, to be honest. So upon return from that deployment, my best friend from the Marine Corps was in an incident in a parking lot where he was knocked to the ground and suffered a traumatic brain injury, and was in intensive care for about 6 days, and then spent the remainder of his year in the Marine Corps with Wounded Warrior Battalion West, and it was really hard for me. He was like my best friend. We were pretty tight, and we struggled through that time to maintain contact. Now him and I probably talk once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks, depending on the time frame of the year. He's an athletic trainer in West Texas, right outside of Dallas, just east of Dallas. And he's a phenomenal guy, and he has a 3 or 4 year old little girl. She's 4. She might be 4. But yeah, and I keep in touch with some other guys that I was pretty close with, but there's not a lot of them. There's probably 5
handful
that I keep in touch with. Yeah,
I guess where I was going with that is there's a statistic that came out that more than in the past several years, a larger percent of vets die from suicide than actual combat.
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
like 22 a day, 1 an hour, roughly.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that's an insane.
Again, I think
happening.
It is an insane, and it's a very troubling and unfortunate number. And I throughout my time getting out, I have been involved with some veterans associations, and try to do what I can for my fellow veteran. And I think one of the biggest things you can do is when I was at Oregon State, I made a ton of veteran friends and colleagues, and you got to find one. I think you got to find yourself. I think that's something that guys really struggle with, is they get out, they don't go out and find themselves. Who are you? And the hard part is with some guys, my experience was a little different, where when I got out, I got divorced, and I was dealing with a situation with my daughter and I didn't see her for a couple months. But I had me time, right? Where some guys that get out, I got a wife, a couple kids. Like you can't just say, hey, I need to go take a walkabout for the next 3 months. You can't do that. So finding your identity, I think that's the beauty of some of these like veteran rehabilitation centers. They have some of them around. A friend of mine who was in the Marine Corps with me actually is, was at one, might still be at one to be honest. But like you got to really figure out you know, and then the other thing too, I think with that is, it's important to make sure that you identify and speak regularly with people that can speak to the situations that you're dealing with, right? Like if, you know, I can't attest to, you know, the individuals who, you know, lost their best friends in firefights. I can't attest to that because that didn't happen to me. But there's so many people that's happened to that you can go out, you can find people that have had it happen to them, and you can say, hey, how'd you do this? You know, what like, you know, how are you doing so good? Like, how are you happy right now? Like, what is it that, you know, but I think a lot of guys, one of the things that happens when they get out is they isolate themselves in a bad way. Like, instead of finding themselves, they end up turtle shelled up and they end up just sitting around drinking or doing drugs or whatever. And it's like they're just sitting in this, you know, foxhole of misery. And it's like, you got to get out, dude. You got, you know, like I really like the metaphor of, you know, you see the pictures of, and I read this really interesting, like kind of thing a while ago where it said, you know, there was a Marine in the hole and a guy walks by, you know, the chaplain walks by and says, you know, the Lord is with you, my son, you know, be peaceful. And then he just walks off. And then the doctor walks by and he says, take these pills, they'll help with your depression and anxiety. And then a Marine walks by, jumps in the hole. And he says, well, what are you doing? Why would you jump in the hole that I'm in? He says, I've been in this hole and I can help you get out. I think that that's crucial. I think, you know, like I can attest to, like when I talk to guys regularly that are like, you know, like I'm dealing with an issue right now or I think I'm drinking too much. And I'm like, okay, well, here's what I did. And here's, you know, try it. See if it works for you. You know, like I said, one of the things I decided I made a list of all the good things that have happened to me because of alcohol and all the bad things. And I'll tell you, the good list didn't have anything on it. The bad was a pretty large list, you know. So when you look at the list, you're like, why am I doing this? There's nothing on this good column. It's like maybe I socialize with people sometimes. Like that's a small thing to, you know, all the bad, right? So for me, it was a no-brainer to give up drinking. It was a no-brainer that should have happened, you know, 8 years prior to that or so.
Can you drink in the military?
Yeah, most definitely. You're just supposed to be of legal age, right? You're supposed to be 21, but yeah.
That's crazy they let you fight before you can drink.
It's pretty wild.
That doesn't make sense.
I think it also is one of the reasons that kind of leads to individuals having issues with things like alcohol. If I had experience with it at 18 years old as what we consider in the United States as a legal adult, right? I can vote. Well, now I can't use tobacco because we changed that age to 21. Right. So maybe one of the things that we have to do, I had an interesting discussion with a friend of mine, one of the friends of mine who came up here to make sure I was okay when I got out, about changing the age to serve in the military to 21. And he said, maybe this is a good thing. Maybe we should think about changing this to 21 years old. But the question you got to ask yourself then is, are you going to be able to maintain enough personnel? If you have to ask everybody to wait till they're 21, are you going to have enough personnel to keep your forces adequate? I don't know. I can't attest to that because I'm not a general in the military, you know. So I don't know what the numbers are. But the numbers between 18 and 21 years old,
big part of them
are really big. So if you eliminate those numbers, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
You know, so I get it, but other countries like in Europe, they do 18-year-old drinking age and it works out, you know, and you know, so.
What do you think would happen if the U.S. military went away tomorrow?
It'd be chaos, man.
You think so?
Oh gosh, most definitely.
Around the world?
Oh, most definitely. Not only within, because one of the things that's interesting, like I said, I can only attest to my small piece of the pie that I've experienced, but there's areas within our globe that, you know, they rely heavily on us for security and support, and if that entity went away, there's groups of individuals out there that would take advantage of that and take advantage of those areas. I really think that, and maybe I'm completely wrong. I really don't know, but with that being said, you look at certain countries that are around Asia that are, their thought process and their ideologies are a little different than ours. And there's nothing, that's not to say that they're bad, but, usually when people get together and one person thinks and feels a different way than the other person, if you put those people together too closely, there's going to be a conflict. That's just, so it's interesting how, and I think that one of the things that's difficult with nowadays with the United States as a country is we're really struggling, I think. And I hope that we're, going through just a cycle where we'll come back around and unite and come together, because there's a reason that this place is called the United States, right? We're not the divided states. It's not, it's not red versus blue. It's not, urban areas versus farmers, or, loggers versus, urban areas. It's not, if we all figure out that somehow we can get along and work together, it would be so much, it would just be so much easier. But again, if I'm the individual who I ride my bicycle to work every day, and I am going green, and I live in the city in a high-rise apartment, and my ideologies are one way, and then I'm talking to the, redneck gun-toting logger who lives in Eastern Oregon, like sometimes it's like they just can't relate to each other. That gun-toting redneck that drives a log truck in Eastern Oregon, he's like, why live in the city? Why ride a bike to work? Why not drive a truck? Because, but if we all realize that we can work together as a unit and as a whole, there's a need for all of it. There really is. There's a need for both sides. Mm-hmm. The red and blue thing, the Democrat, the Republican thing, both sides are necessary. If you allow them to, they can provide checks and balances. But if you're all in on one way or all in on the other, it just doesn't work. It's in my opinion, it just seems like it's a playground fight. There's not a winner. Everybody's going to get sent to the office, and I don't know what the office is, but you know what I mean? Metaphorically speaking, it's, it's a lose-lose, it's like.
Well, so I'm curious about that. So it sounds like the entire time you were over there was under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
So if the administration switched and they maybe had morals that you were against, how would that have shifted your view of like being in the military, and then all of a sudden now you're doing something for something you don't believe in?
Well, I think one of the things that's important with that being said is, this is where the struggle sometimes happens within our political system, I think, is sometimes I think that there's individuals that make decisions and choices for our military that, one, aren't previous military, or two, aren't in the military currently. So if it's really hard for you to make decisions for people when you're not a part of what they're a part of, and it's like you don't really understand what the term I would use is the common person, or the common, Marine or soldier or air person, or, sailor, is dealing with, or Coast Guard member is dealing with. You don't, because you're not a part of that. Like, I have no clue what the needs of the Coast Guard are daily. Not a single clue. I know they need boats and rope and buoys. I don't, or, lifesaver, I don't. But I wasn't in the Coast Guard, so I don't know that, so I'm not making choices on what the Coast Guard needs.
So when you have someone up there in Washington making decisions that affect your life, how do you compensate with just being like, all right, now I guess I got to follow rules, some bureaucratic rules that maybe aren't even the best thing to do here?
You know what I think is the crucial thing with that allows you to process it in a way where you can be like, I'm okay with this, and that's because of the person to your left and to your right. I like people say like, like you asked me why did I serve in the Marine Corps? Like, my initial reason that I served in the Marine Corps was because I sat and watched on television. I watched these people of what the media portrayed to be bad guys mistreating women and children and innocent people. And I went and joined. Like, literally, I was sitting watching the news of what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there was like, kids and women with burns all over them from, improvised explosive devices, and, heck, even military, U.S. military, explosives, you know what I mean? And I was like, I don't know, maybe I can do something about this. And I went down and joined, Once I got in, though, I learned very quickly that it was more about and this is only because I served in the infantry and there wasn't any females, that I say brothers, but it was more about my brothers to my left and my right. It was crucial for me. It became a sense where then this is another military term that people use, is I was my brother's keeper, right? Like my brothers around me needed me and I needed them. And if they were slipping up or I was slipping up, we had to fix it, and again, I think that that's one of the crucial elements that makes the military so unique. And when I meet individuals who, aren't going to go to college, I'm not going to go to vocational school, I don't know what I want to do as a career, join the military. Even if you hate what you're doing, it's only 4 years. Or, some other, I think the Navy's 6, but that's not that long. You get paid, even if you end up doing a job you don't want to do. It's only so many years. You get paid every 1st and the 15th. You have medical, dental. Why not? I mean, I call it my education was paid for because I was in the Marine Corps. There's some negatives, right? Like I have, 3 compressed vertebrae and a bulging disc in my lower back, and tinnitus in my ears, but that's a small price to pay, in my opinion, for, what I was capable of accomplishing for, again, like I said, my fellow man, and that was the most important part for me. So when I see these individuals who, within our nation are, fighting each other, and it's like, if they just took the time to have a conversation with each other. If I'm a member of Antifa and you're a member of Black Lives Matter, I guarantee if we sat down and talked for at least 30 minutes without any sort of confrontational approach to it, we would be like,
I think they're on the same side.
You and I have a lot in common.
Isn't Antifa anti-fascists?
I'm pretty sure they are the left. I'm just throwing out some really wild. Yeah. I'm just throwing out some wild growth. So what's your other one? Your right nationalist,
right wing and left wing, yeah.
Right, yeah, or whatever the case may be. But basically what I'm saying is, if
have conversations like this,
if you and I, and you and I have spent enough time together, being in the same educational institution and having some of the same courses together, that there's some things that you and I probably disagree on, but that's okay. It's okay that you and I disagree on some things. You and I can talk about it. And if at the end of the conversation, if I say, I think you're completely bonkers about that, and I disagree with you completely, you could say, that's fine. I think you're completely bonkers and I disagree with you. And it's not the end of the world. That's just, that's the beauty of good, controlled conversation that, in my opinion, there's things about, issues that are happening in our society where maybe if somebody who was very in depth into it had a conversation with me about it, I'd be like, wow, I didn't know that.
Well, here's the thing. Something to learn. I feel like propaganda and misinformation is so easy to spread along with fear mongering. Because like if I'm just a charismatic person who knows some facts that I can maybe alter a little bit,
right?
You'd believe it, and then you actually hear someone like tell you, no, what you just heard is wrong. But it's so easy to believe things that are maybe misinformation. Right. So
most definitely. It's so, and it's also so easy to create hate for certain people if you can portray that person as somebody that everybody should hate. And I seen an interesting thing recently that I really enjoyed, and it said, don't focus so much on your reputation, focus on your character. Because my reputation is just what other people see. So if you see the person that you might think that I am, that's fine. But if I'm a person who's honest and trustworthy and hardworking and empathetic and respectful, my personal fulfillment is what is important to me. I'm not worried about what other people are doing. I tell my daughter this sometimes because being a 6-year-old child, you're very investigative and you want to and you comment inappropriately, I think, but not inappropriately because she's 6. But I was at the pool with my daughter. She had swim lessons, and there was this guy that had long dreadlocks, and my daughter was like, "Oh, Dad, look at his hair." And I was like, "His hair is cool. I like it." And my daughter was like, "It's crazy." And I was like, "He likes his hair crazy." Yeah. Because I think that, there's something to be said, and he didn't hear what my daughter would have said, but if he would have heard it, and he would have said, "Oh, it was, it took me a while to get my hair to how it is. You want to touch it?" And because, again, I think that there's something to be said where if you've never been exposed to certain things, you don't know. So, maybe if you, say something aloud or whatever, sometimes I think the intent isn't necessarily what people interpret it to be, right? Like
That's a good.
You know?
There's a good quote that goes by that. It's we judge ourselves by our actions, but or ourselves by our intentions, but others by their actions.
Isn't that crazy?
It's great, but it's dead
It
true.
really
You know?
is. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Where I think that this is something, that's important. I think is this is an old saying, and I think maybe it's barbaric to some degree. But if you're going to talk the talk, walk the walk, right? So if I'm going to sit here right now and I'm going to tell you that I'm a loving father and that I'm a supportive parent and that I, want to be a great football coach and, et cetera, et cetera, I better be walking that walk. I better be pursuing those things in my life. I better be like, one of the things for me that I've learned with myself, I've been reading this book recently called Raising Men. And one of the things that I get out of the book that I really liked, and I'm not just taking away raising men, I'm taking away raising children about this book, and I can't raise my daughter the same way that I raise my sons because it's my daughter and they're my sons. It's different. But with that being said, there was 3 things that he says, and he gives every new parent or every person that's going through basic underwater demolition school the same advice. He says, maintain your composure, don't get hurt, and never quit. And I think that is, and the way that I look at that is about being a parent is, number 1 is the biggest one I struggle with. So at times I allow myself to lose my composure, and it's because as a parent, it's difficult. Like I'm getting out of the car, my wife and I are somewhere, we're going to the park, we're going to the store, whatever. Maybe my daughter's like not listening and she's moving out toward the street where it could be dangerous, and I have to stop, come back here. I'm trying to get my son out into the stroller, whatever the case might be. All those moving parts, sometimes your composure, it just dissipates, and I gotta, all right, listen, family, come here, like, okay, this is what we're doing, hey, get in the car, you know what I mean? Son's in the stroller, my wife will push the stroller, so, and then the second one, the way I look at don't getting hurt is, I think sometimes as a parent, one of the things that happens for parents is they put themselves in positions where emotionally they can get hurt. Like, if my daughter is mad at me or upset with me, I don't take it very personal because I know that later on she'll feel differently, but I've had my daughter tell me before when she's upset with me, I hate you, Dad. That's okay. But if I took that literal and personal, I would be upset and I wouldn't be able to recover about it. But she probably did hate me at that moment, and that's okay. It's okay to hate me when I'm telling you that that you need to go, put on tennis shoes because we're going somewhere that requires you to have tennis shoes on as footwear. I don't care. It's, I'm looking out for your well-being. Just go do what I'm asking you to do. Yeah. And then the last one, in terms of never quit, I look at what my father didn't do for me and what my stepfather did for me and my football coaches did for me, and men that do for me currently in my life that are my role models and mentors, you should never quit as a parent, never quit as a husband, but never stop growing either. I think that's maybe one that's missing within those that's one of the more, don't ever stop growing. Always work toward
and learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like
always. That's why I read books, man. That's why I, watch videos, and that's why I watch documentaries. I'm always curious, and I'm always open, and I'm always trying to like learn and grow as a person. And one of the things I do that's interesting is like I go to this local pottery place here in town, and I paint mugs, and I really like it. My wife told me just recently I just painted my 3rd mug, and she said no more mugs, but I like painting coffee mugs.
Make little ladybug mugs or what?
The one I just made was a sugar skull. I just finished a sugar skull, and the one I did before that was a Viking mug. And the one I did before that was like a mouth with like really big teeth, and I colored them yellow. And my wife told me it was icky, but I think it's funny, so that's why I colored them like yellowy, like they were stained. It made me laugh, but I like it. It's different. I'm not very artistic, but as I progress and as I continue to paint, it's something that I find like calming and soothing. Like I go there, and what's funny is, it's hard because I was there a week ago with my daughter and my son, and my daughter, she wants to paint something too, but when she's painting something, it's a little different for a 6-year-old than it is for me. I'm taking my time. I'm being really careful. My daughter, she's just splotching paint on, just having a good time, and so it's not as calming and as soothing, I've learned. So it's an activity that my wife and I need to do, like a date night kind of activity, but yeah, I mean, you should, I'm always looking for something different, man. Like recently, I think one of the things I'm going to do over the summer is I think I'm going to try to drag my wife out to a date night, and maybe her and I will go watch a play or something, some sort of performance, because I think that's neat.
what
It's
life's
different. It's outside of my normal comfort zone, so.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, cool. You've shared a lot of advice today, a lot of stories, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you. Have anything else that you want to share? It seems like every time I finish these whatever these things are, these
Yeah.
episodes, my guests always, we get up and I put away the cameras and everything, and they're like, "Man, I really would have liked to talk about that." So I want to give people the opportunity of I don't really go into this with too many questions per se. Just kind of like I don't know. I guess my goal with this is to learn how people live their life. Like say.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely.
I'm talking to people, and then like for future people in that situation or around people live in that situation, they can have more empathy. They can learn.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know, but
I think there's something to be said about the things that you can gather from this about people that are nothing like you.
Yeah.
I think that, I listen to podcasts regularly, and I really enjoy them, and I find them to be informative in a different way where.
It's like subtle life changes that you make. Like,
I listen
that.
to certain people talk about certain things, or, but no. In closing, I think the biggest thing that I could say and the message that I would spread toward people is never stop growing as a person. Never, I never want to settle. I have goals. I have 5-year goals at this point in my life, and my 5-year goal right now is to be a very successful husband and a very successful parent, a successful school teacher and a successful football coach. And what the success means in each one of those things is a little different. I want to, when you talk about, being a successful husband, I want to be supportive. I want to be loving. I want to be, constantly interacting with my wife. I want to make sure that I am meeting her needs and supporting her love language and filling her her love tank. And, for my children, I want to make sure that I'm empathetic and nurturing and educational and mentoring and, my high school students, same thing. I want to, I want to make sure that if you don't have a good example at home of what an adult should be, I'm here. I got you. I think that's an interesting, thing, like way to look at it. But I got you. Same thing with my football players.
I like that. Just to play devil's advocate here for a minute, just to entertain the idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say never stop growing, but then what is at the end of the tunnel? What's at the end of the life that makes all the growing worth it? You know
what I think is at the end of the life that makes everything growing is that I have spread every ounce of knowledge that I picked up through experience or that I've picked up from others to the future generations. And I seen this picture recently that I loved, and it was a picture of a father and a kid, and the father, they each had a hourglass within their body on the picture, and the father's was empty and the kid's was filling. And I really liked it because I want to fill people's hourglass, and I want, when they write the end date on my tombstone, I want to be empty. I want to have given everything that I possibly could. I'm not trying to save nothing. I'm not trying to keep anything back. If I want to be a successful business owner someday, or if I want to be a successful football coach, or, a successful entrepreneur, or whatever the situations might be, I want to give everything I have. I when I sat down here and you and I started talking about the Marine Corps, I was a good Marine. I was good at my job, and I was really good at what I did, and I gave it my all. That's why. That's what made me good at what I did. I always cared, and it was always important to me.
I like that. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, man.
Of course, anytime, man.